당서 나타는 먼저 거기 동안을 줘야지 답을 탐지킨 비고번 토비 최도 당서 냠는지에 답람네 카레라나 네 람기린 바 산주 람기린 바 세야데 텔레아 기고 중요 람기린 바다 징게 람기린 바 네 기비 침비 람기린 바 세 당서 마하시사제다 기비 침비 람기린 바 전시 선바티 기에 냠는 나도 갑라는 네 가르는 거라서네 지금 라유 두의 제도 안에 파신 중인 냠내세네 안에 현규 두의 제도 안두용 오버시세 냠내 나야기 어도스네 냠내 나야시 안디 나량아주다 그신 현규 두의 제도 난 두용 오버시 나네다 어도스네 내가 말레살에 나지린tin 마시야로
Good evening. We're continuing to look at the Lam Rim, which is divided up into trainings that are in accordance with practitioners of varying capacities. So there are the trainings which are shared with practitioners of initial capacity. Developing those insights within oneself, one develops a more expansive mind and a deeper understanding of the Dharma. Independent on that, one engages in the trainings that are in accordance, or shared rather, that are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity. So training in these then, one's depth of knowledge, one's insight into one's own mental processes, and the breadth of one's outlook expands ever further. And that then is the ideal basis to engage in the trainings which are unique to a practitioner of supreme capacity. And here one trains in the practices of a bodhisattva. The practices of a bodhisattva can be divided into two. There are those which are focused on benefiting the continuum of others, and that's the trainings of the six perfections. And there are those which are to benefit one's own continuum, and that's the practices of the six perfections. And then there are those which are to positively influence others, and that's the four trainings that we've come to now. So a fortnight ago, we started to look at these and went through most of them, and we'll continue then tonight.
Sentient 탐지기도 상교고방 토비치도 람냠된 지도 전시선반남 지도다 소소 상교고방 토야려야 안 소소 규기 뇨모바디게 마바와나 안 상교고방 토토야 매원자 안디 데델야 안은 한주기 진소 파진 중에 냠는 제와 디샤가 진배 냠는다 주제 냠는 뇌배 냠는 파진 중에 냠는 지야래 나 Sentient 탐지기도 상교고방 토야디야 심진유도 심진이 되기 주요하다 심진이 동안 세야치도 상여고바 토바지고로와 내 전주선배 냠는 람 냠는 집에 내가 소야 내가 그랬으네 심진이 된다래야 냠는 지고 봐자 제사다 현기 뒤에치도 현기 현이라 판디 주야기 자와치야 되라 다 뒤용 오버시 있어야 돼 냠는 제와 돼 수순고로와
To become a Buddha for the sake of others, the bodhisattva has to completely eradicate all afflictions from her continuum, as well as develop all good qualities. Without doing that, Buddhahood will not be attained, and she will not be able to become the most skilled of guides in terms of helping others attain their own enlightenment. That being said, though, whilst the bodhisattva is training in the six perfections, striving to become a Buddha for the sake of others, the bodhisattva doesn't sit back and focus on their own development solely. They also, at the same time, engage in activities to have a positive influence on others, to be of benefit to others. In other words, whilst the bodhisattva is training, they guide others within the extent of their capacity. They guide others so that they can already start developing good qualities, abandoning faults in their continuum, and start progressing towards Buddhahood. So therefore, the bodhisattva doesn't wait to attain Buddhahood themselves before engaging in beneficial deeds for others, before directly trying to be of benefit to others.
ane duen jeba, duen tunpa sedi, di shi di, ane duyu ngobo shi se, dirwa da.
On page 45, one finds the 4 ways to positively influence others. So in brief then, the first is giving whatever is necessary. Secondly, is pleasantly teaching the Dharma. Thirdly, is encouraging others in the practice of the Dharma. And fourthly, living in accordance with the teachings oneself. How does one benefit others? Well, in brief, it's to aid them in overcoming suffering and attaining happiness. That is the way others are benefited. Other than that, there is no benefit to others. One strives to help them overcome suffering and attain happiness.
Jikpechiga sanji ne shengi dun tuyade, shengi dun tuyade, shen dunga seyada, shen digi tuyade mado, sanji shen dun tuyade mado yomaro, shengi dunga seyada digi tuyade. Chanju simbanam gyan shengi dun tuyade, shengi dunga seyada, shengi digi tuyade. Dan haran zuyo ne shen le jike digi kasa shengi dun jigi yolamna, ana shengi digi tuyade, shengi dunga seyagi, jayadi di mado yomaro wada, shengi shen dun tuyade.
This is the case actually for all beings. Whether it's an ordinary being of limited capacity such as ourselves, how does one help others? It's to help them attain happiness and overcome problems and difficulties. That too is what a bodhisattva engages in. A bodhisattva helps others overcome problems and difficulties and attain happiness. And so too the most developed of beings, a Buddha. A Buddha is focused on helping others attain happiness and overcome suffering. So what varies is the capacity and the skill of the being, but the focus of helping others achieve happiness and overcome suffering, that is the same.
Yan lule tembe dunga yongore, yan semla tembe dunga. Lule tembe lui kyabe dunga, lule nazataye dunga, lui sawe dunga, ten lule tembe dunga. Ten semla tene du, semge namdo ramera di shene dunga, lule tembe dunga china, semla tembe dunga nima do yang mero wada. Sezanda dunga se yang du, se de kar se gorsan, lule tembe dunga se gore, semla tembe dunga se go, dingi meba se gorwa. Dingi meba se ba ina, and digi di lule timbe digi semle timbe digi ligoro. Digi yonga dia lule timbe digi chungore, semle timbe digi chungore. Says lule timbe digi di lule tine tuku, lule timbe kanga di dunga di lule tine se horwata, anzuki lule. Then lule timbe digi dia lule tine tuku gore. Tanda semle tine yonga dunga di semgi tine dunga se gore, semgi tine dewa de semgi tine tuku gore. Says digi duya di yonga di lule tene chi yungore, semla tene yungore, dunga yongya de lule tene yungore, semla tene, dini mato yongso yomare, digi yongsa da, dunga yongsa da, dini le tene yongso mato yomare. Chesam, di medu, tanga juge dunga sege tablam de da, ane digi duye tablam de ya, ane lule tene digi duye da, ane semla tene digi duye, dini mato yomare wada.
Another area of similarity is in terms of happiness and suffering, in that both are encountered through the same 2 pathways. One experiences happiness either through the pathway of the physical pathway, one's body, or the mental pathway. Same too with happiness. Either one experiences physical happiness or mental happiness. And in fact, the happiness that one strives for in our context, the context of the Dharma, is the happiness that is experienced when suffering is eliminated. So that's quite different from the worldly understanding. So as one eliminates physical suffering, one will experience physical happiness. As one eliminates mental suffering, one experiences mental happiness.
Nene zadang jogi zo ben lule tembe dunga di dunga se da lule tembe tiki chubaine semla tembe dunga da semla tembe tiki chuma da boina ane kanga di da se tugo marwa chisa kanga la de go dene inza jiza dene ki lule tembe tiki se da semla tembe tiki se dia ane kan chubo se go se na chisa duyong obo shi sidanga jogi jimbe nyamlan jeore jimba tangore se de jimbe nyamlan jeore se da jimbe nyamlan de la 사징의 진바다 아니지기 미지비 진바 아니 주기 진바 세는 진바 그신 녀마 샤바나 진비리 숨수여와 제가 드네 이제 진비 냠는 제거를 때도 사징이 진비 냠는 제거를 진바 땅에 되갑라 네 류라 아니 지게 사야동야게 제부 강아 요번에 동하데 아니 사징이 진바도 디기 강아세야다 차베 동하다 차유 동하다 드네 요번에 류 드네 요도 아니 하나 주기 드네게 차베 동하 요번에 두로게 세야다 곰베세와 안 드네게 류네 나자게 드네 요번에 맨주지지 맨기 턴에 두친 세도 세투의 연구로 제가 진바 땅고래 세 제가 류레 템비게 내가 다지서 탈도 소말 내가 비동아 세야리아 코도 세투레들 진비게 냠는디기 땅 산생기 진바 땅와라 때네 하는 세투 고로와
Much of what we engage in is to focus on overcoming physical suffering and trying to attain physical happiness that comes about in dependence on the material world. Whilst what we really need is to overcome mental suffering and thereby to attain mental happiness. Nevertheless, though, both types are needed and people in the world engage in these. However, in order to be able to have the time and to have the capacity to engage in the Dharma, one needs to experience the ripening results of generosity. One needs a certain level of material comfort. So therefore, in order to benefit others, the bodhisattva will engage in the practice of material generosity so that others' basic needs are fulfilled, because then they are more likely to have the time and the capacity to engage in Dharma practice, to engage in their own, through their own efforts, eliminating the causes of suffering and accumulating the causes for happiness. But in order to be able to engage in an entry level of Dharma practice, certainly the temporary physical suffering needs to be overcome.
Nyambar mawa se de la na jugi jida nyambar mawa se da ngada jitin bi ge da tune nyambar mawa se de an ngada ki sin ning ji wo she da an jige paje le ya na wa zhuo ji she de an jige an do che na ngada jugi tun bi tone ki she de nyambar mawa se cha go na den da den gi chu gi den den bi nyambar mawa se de kar se ne da ko le ya an jige jin bi gi nyamlen che ya da gyapsum기 gyapso 조단 gyamle samtata 진비 냠len 제단 추주 냠len 제단 세비 냠len 제단 도치는 그런 지금 그런기 미리야 안 지금 원벌을 빠베게다 원벌을 빠베게 되니기 원벌을 빠와서네 최이 냠len 오수간 균에 최이 냠len 마제간 마신게 되네 망고여와 제가 되니기 제가 안 지금 진비 냠len 제거를 되는데 약고여를 셀랍제야다 냠lenje tuyada ane chudri 냠lenje an sobe 냠lenje bala soba an denige tuyos lam guleke tuyos ko osugenjelia ne dame ben tongni sinige namje tia tongba yin namje dame ben namje kom gus 냠lenje jua dosine pajin juge 냠lenje da tenbade ma tenbade da basore nyambar ma wasigorwa.
Of the three types of generosity, here in the context of the four ways of positively influencing others, that refers specifically or primarily to the giving of, to the practice of material generosity. Then the second of the four ways to positively influence others is pleasantly teaching the Dharma. And this is advice for how the bodhisattva should interact with others, both in a formal teaching of the Dharma context, a formal teaching context, as well as in general interactions, that the bodhisattva should engage with others in a way that they will find pleasing and wanting to interact with the bodhisattva, especially when relationships are new, when relationships in this life are being developed. Then the third is the encouraging sentient beings in the practice of the Dharma. So here, the bodhisattva, in accordance with the intelligence of the students, as well as in accordance with the foundation in the Dharma that they have already developed, will guide them initially in practices such as generosity, refuge, ethical restraint, and patience. And as they develop, both in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of integration, in terms of mental transformation, then latter teachings such as the cultivation of calm abiding, how to reflect on selflessness, then these will be taught.
ane digi drubyegi gyudi pa sa ju korwa gyu koron sa ju gore chesan gyudi sa ju go gyudi pa tyen go di che gore di che ne kyona di ungre se de chebe de ane gyudi pa gar ting go se kyora jimbe nyamlen che gore suje nyamlen che gore sebe nyamlen che gore tu sung de koron jimbe nyamlen che gore se jimbe nyamlen che ba na jimbe digi tebu de ma ba na kyora long ju yong gore chesan de long ju so so la long ju na de ne long ju thone ka nga de se gi ro 지나다 다 추름송고 그래서 추름송와이나 추름송와라 때네 소수게 깨와 마음반에는 체델이네 소소야보다 마음반에 안지게 깨와 치마섬 다음에 사다 미고 봐토야 토요도 냐와당 만송을 끼 말해서 이제는 강아지 지시세 그래서 안딜에 마세 안에 추름송와나 아주 두치네 타바다 템지기 보고 봐도 규차고 그래서 두치 추름송야 돼야다 쇠배님을 해야 돼 지나 누치는 다음에 봐 신의 주비 신의 고미하다 다음에 봐 또배 싫어 고미하 뜻을 다 녀모 봐세야게 그 간실에 코로나야 둥아기 가서 디기 용의 그 규디 봐 줘야 되라 안진배 냠는다 주전년에 쇠배 냠는 되게 봐시 냠는 제주야 안다 그런 거 둥아세야 돼야 둥아세야 세에게 탑람들라 네 나가소리 신에게 남자 셰바나 다음에 벤 남자 된지 디곰제 곰발에 되네 아니 요모 바파 아세 된다 제가 콜라 가르팅 거스네 코로나 디기 용의 규 탑람데 봐때 아니 둥아세에게 규 탑라데 봐딘 거래 디템 바이나 디코 냠네 제바이나 코로나 띵기 대화 톱투고 거래 띵이 둥아세도 거래 제가다 현기 둥아 디기 주야다 둥아세에게 탑람 약쇼 니마도 요마다 가서 우리 코로나리아 디기 요야게 규 파코라 탑라 떼제 코로나리아 디라렌데 코라 규 사주야다 둥아 요야게 규디 파 메바스에게 녀보드 파 떼제 디 곰주야데 디 곰주제 아니 코로나 규레 둥아 규 녀모바 마 제게 땡지 대와 토비하게 탈바담지 고바 토비하게 탑란 떼 디팅 거로다
The bodhisattva, of course, is a highly developed practitioner and will be very clear that aiding others through material generosity only brings about a very temporary respite from suffering. But nevertheless, the bodhisattva, motivated by love and compassion, will do so so as to establish a connection with beings and independence on this connection, as well as through their coarsest levels of suffering being resolved. The bodhisattva then, whether now or in a future life, will strive to guide that sentient being in how to develop the causes themselves to achieve happiness and to overcome suffering. So here one can imagine through establishing a connection through material generosity, then moving into the second and the third of these 4 ways of positively influencing others, through in a pleasant and a harmonious manner, teaching them the Dharma, being the second, and then the third, in particular, the causes for generosity. So here there'll be teachings given on basic karma, as well as the causes that will come from generosity, as well as how to engage in the practice of generosity in a skillful manner. In this way, the Bodhisattva will help the suffering sentient being accumulate the causes for happiness in future lives. And accompanying this, as the practitioner develops a closer connection and relationship with the Bodhisattva, more trust in them, the Bodhisattva will also guide them in the crucial training of ethical restraint. Because it's through, in particular, ethical restraint, as well as generosity, that the practitioner, this new practitioner, will be accumulating the causes for happiness in their future lives, of good rebirth and material abundance. And then as the connection develops and the skill of the practitioner develops, then the Bodhisattva will train them in further ways to accumulate further causes for happiness, not just ethical restraint and generosity, but further causes, further techniques to develop causes for happiness. And then eventually, the Bodhisattva will also train them in how to abandon causes or eliminate causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. And here come the trainings in selflessness and calm abiding. So in this way, the Bodhisattva progresses through these 4 ways of positively influencing others, focusing on helping sentient beings to accumulate the causes for happiness and accumulate or develop the skill to eradicate causes that will otherwise lead to suffering and avoid accumulating causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. So this is the meaning of this topic. This is the meaning of positively influencing others. And this is the activity of a bodhisattva, positively influencing others to accumulate the causes for happiness and to avoid accumulating causes for suffering and to eradicate previously accumulated causes for suffering. This, again, is how a bodhisattva positively influences others.
Dunga se yu tablan pa temba zamgi digribesan dizami digo mar dime banza karson duen joba si or duen nyamzo lenju go res or da chisa ma disu ma tenje tenne an duje digi pa duen da konso nyamzo lenju go res duen joba si da zumba che go duen joba si de chisa dujal ma jimba da chuje sube ba ji che go pa ten an dang bo ten ma ten da sing ma wa nyamzo de sing ma chisa du stine ten cha je nyamzo le ma je ten cha ne nge xie sa wen sha sina ji go ma go pa ten je ko le nyamzo len ju go nyamzo ma le na pan do yong ma wa chisa nyamzo len ju go wa chisa ji de duen jo ba si go.
The second of the 4 is to pleasantly teach the Dharma. This is then the imparting of knowledge. Imparting of knowledge in a manner that the suffering being will be most receptive to. But that is insufficient. The Bodhisattva will not leave it at a mere imparting of knowledge, because whilst those imprints are of great value, they are insufficient to lead to lasting, stable happiness. That knowledge has to be integrated. So whilst engaging in imparting of knowledge, the second, the Bodhisattva will also engage in the third, encouraging the sentient being to practice the Dharma. So this Bodhisattva will encourage the sentient being to both gather knowledge, but not to be satisfied with a mere accumulation of knowledge. Encourage the practitioner to recognize that that's insufficient. That knowledge needs to be integrated. The mind needs to be transformed. This then is the meaning of the third point, the third way to positively influence others, to encourage them in the practice of the Dharma. To the extent that knowledge has been gained, they are encouraged to integrate that knowledge and transform their mind.
나 딘마 시바들이 당들이 딘마로야디 데네 샹라 지더라 냠소 렌도 쭉바따 라니 이장 안에 8주 냠소 렌베 된된바데스.
That then presents the review of what we looked at last week, a fortnight ago. Now returning to the text, the fourth point. So again, the translations are slightly different. Fourthly, you yourself should also engage in similar practices for the benefit of others, living and practicing in accordance with the six perfections.
Then shenla jidara nyamso lendu chupa tar sede deshin yelang so de nyambar mawa sede shenlia jimbe nyamlen suji nyamlen sebe nyamlen pajru dus nyamlen jeore sa ne jamro jeore sa na an lunga yismi 미외 주봉을 주름 송고래서 되네마 건조 바 두수 제고래스마 송제 건조 냠는 제고라로와 건조를 냠술 렌주바 나시 라니 이장 소소라는 이장 아니 파진주기 냠는 건 마셰셰베디게 소소라는 냠는 제바고 고래서 그래 제사 된튜바시데 소소라는 뒤시기 마텐시 건조기 냠는 제바나시 소소한 냠는 제바 니가기 냠는 제바 찍고 그래 마도 소소냐리 마제바제 미산달이 안 겨도 시작을 제거를 해야지 엔디고 말해서 그랬다 된 튜바시도 소수게 냠는제 소소에 냠는 제반다 산 바시에 바디야 산에 냠는 제주부 소소에 냠는 제고 그래서 마도 소소에 냠는 마제바제 미산다 찍부시에 되나 아니 판도 용 말해야지.
The fourth way to positively influence others then, I'll read it again. You yourself should also engage in similar practices for the benefit of others, living and practicing in accordance with the six perfections. Having taught students, having taught others the various stages of the path, you yourself should also be sure to live in accordance, not just with the words, but their meaning. You yourself should live in accordance with the meaning of the Buddha Dharma. So, for example, having taught the six perfections, you yourself should practice them through your body, speech, and mind. Practice them in the most skillful of ways, and this you need to do yourself. Living in accordance with the meaning of the Dharma, living in accordance with the goal that you're striving to achieve.
파진 두 소소르게 냠래 야고지 마싱바이나 소소 마싱바네 샬래야 야고 시투 말와 돈다 찍디로와 가저 소소 냠는지 소소 하고와지 소소 냠는지 소소 냠뇨사 데네마 샬바 마 랍든 제바나 마노와 마추바 중고데스 연 판도야 침보 용고래 판도야 체 용고래 세상 소소게 냠는 마시바 델야 롭종 마제바 아니 소소 마싱바나 니고 아니 젠리아 디기 주베게 탑람다 동화세 탑람디 발 롭된 야고 지식 말해서 그래요.
The purpose of the fourth point is quite clear. If we do not understand something ourselves, we cannot teach it to others. So this certainly we know is true in terms of the imparting of knowledge. But it's particularly true in terms of the purpose of the Buddha Dharma, which is not just a mere accumulation of knowledge, but independence on that basis of knowledge to transform our mind. So if someone lacks knowledge, they cannot teach others. If someone lacks experience based on that knowledge, they cannot guide others in how to integrate that knowledge into themselves. So therefore, in order to be of greatest benefit to others, the Bodhisattva will strive to gather knowledge, and to integrate that knowledge in them within themselves. And in that way, they will be able to more skillfully guide ever more beings. Not only that, of course, they will be spiritually developing themselves as well.
징내네 징내리 가려운 거를 남나 소소의 냠렘 맞아봐 샹래 셰베나 샹다기 켈린 지금 말했어. 코로나 지금인데 코로나 마신 가지고 간소리 시기도 돼 다가서서 켈린 지금 말했지. 제가 되네자 샹기 소소기 냠는 마제바 시제반데 생기 켈렌체라 갈라하고래지 지산 판도 용하고래지 진의 지그래 냐 지글라 소소의 냠는제 소소의 샹래 냠는 제주고 제두가라 아니 봐줘돼 그런 빼 냠는 야고 되는지 제어도 안줄 롭든지 빼 야고래 섬지 디기 셈슈 파르시네 냠는데 슈 배주시 체용고래지 근데 그 야고 지기도 그런 냠는 빼 야고 안주에 딘다 지긴 세베게 셈슈 파르그레스 냠는 제알이야 소소게 아디 머니 롭장 제해들래 정어서 냠는 딘 제어 라브로와 제대 콘조 코로나 냠는 빼야고 지도 코로나 빼야고 상한조 공한조 있네 콘조 코로나 라바나지 지긴 세베 셈슈 파르그레지
Further benefits that make this an essential step in our training is that if trying to encourage others in the accumulation of causes for happiness and the elimination of causes that will otherwise lead to suffering, if they see us as a hypocrite, as saying one thing but doing something different, or not, or at the least not doing as we say, they will not be inspired at all to practice. They will not be inspired to hear what we have to say, because they will see we are not an example of what we are imparting, of what the guidance we are giving. And even if the practitioner has the wish to benefit others, the benefit they can bring to others will be limited because they will be perceived as a hypocrite. And the second, or an additional reason, this may be the third and now a fourth reason to live in accordance with the Dharma is to the extent that one has and continues to spiritually develop, to transform one's mind, one will have an inspirational impact on others. They will not, as in the previous point, see you as a hypocrite. In fact, they will see you as a role model. They'll be inspired by your presence, inspired by how you live your life in accordance with the six perfections.
탑 사모 디남라 지네자 라바자라 시데 지난 현기 된 주변에 탑람배 야고 사보스데 약쇼스 오래 야고 인델이야 아니 대변에 전시선반의 두스는 냠는 난고레스 지난 디네 장랑 주인에 디네게 현년 주변에 탑람 딜이야 안다디 마송샤게디 안 주인에 인지 미징에 해봐도 될이야 안지 롭장 셰고레스 올랍자 라바자스.
This outline concludes with, in every possible way, train in these profound methods of benefiting others. And in the Tibetan, it ends with an exclamation point. So this point here is being made very strongly, that we ourselves should train in these four ways to positively influence others. We ourselves should emulate the illustration, the example of the Bodhisattvas, and we should strive to fulfill their heartfelt ambition to be of greatest benefit, most meaningful benefit to others.
다디 롭된 약쇼치그래 차거를 지산 규디 코로나도 파 롭된제 하고 와서 코로나도야 아니 저 냠len 제바이나 아니 규디 사완자 제부디기디야 이말와 다 둥아디 파세엘이야 둥아세기 탑람 냠보 또야 다음에 봐 또베다 신내다 다음에 봐 또 로디 곰발 곰주 디 파탑라 디레 디 곰발에 때네 녀모 받에 세고래 세지 ane kowa kia di se tukure sadi koyo yu zawa digi meba sugore sen pa ten di koronzo le nyamno gomchu bayina di gomba le tene ane koronzo yu nyomo ba pang ane dasin pang yu ane kowa le me kiawa le tarche tarpa tamchi kimi kowa top tukore chesan dini zam ta zo koronzo dunga se na digi drube ki zo di karasan tablam de maa ten di nyamlen chechu ya di da 심진이 된주야디 줍탄 쪼디레다 다 내갑리야 아니 지금 거두 될래 아주 대 진비 진바다야다 지사생기 진바 다야다 아니 아직 도스네 저기 미식바 고강하유네 소를 껴비하다 된 제되게다 미식비 진바 도스진 차거를 저다 대한 저기 최세디 취기 진바를 와야 지자 진비 나한테 냠바마와 세되다 먼저 지네 저디 디제야 되다 곧 마디 코로나 탑람디기 때 못해지 디 파디엔진 코로나 라간 따주 코로나 베제 제주야 돼 다디 동아세야다 탑람 디기 주비에게 탑람디 다 약쇼디리 제자스 말말라바 장고그레스 라바
The same final sentence then, in every way possible, train in these profound methods of benefiting others. What are the methods to benefit others again? Well, as I mentioned at the start of the class, the way to help others is to guide them guide them first to identify the causes that lead to happiness, and then, together with this, guide them in how to cultivate those causes of happiness. So it's both. This is the second and the third of these 4 ways to positively influence others. Teach others, interact with others in a way that they'll be most receptive to, and then encourage them to take the knowledge that one has imparted and to develop that within themselves. But to be really able to do that effectively comes to the 4th point. Oneself needs to be trained and skilled in both knowledge and mental transformation. So to take, for example, the training of generosity, one needs to be skilled oneself in practice of material generosity, in practice of giving, of fearlessness, of saving those whose life is in serious danger. And then the third practice of generosity is that of giving the Dharma. So oneself needs to train in all aspects of the Dharma, for example, the 3 of generosity, in order to develop both knowledge and inner transformation, so as to be able to guide others. And likewise, not only do others need to be guided in how to achieve happiness, but also how to eliminate suffering. So that there is the cultivation of calm abiding and wisdom realizing emptiness. But in order to be able to train others in this, oneself needs to have understood the process of samsara and how through realizing emptiness that one can break this wheel, break the cycle of cyclic existence. But merely realizing emptiness is insufficient. Calm abiding too needs to be attained. So therefore, to be able to benefit others, one needs to gather this knowledge oneself and develop it within one's own continuum. So therefore, this final sentence is primarily about cultivating these qualities within oneself, but as we saw in the very first sentence in this section, with the motivation of bodhicitta, one transforms oneself in order to be of greatest benefit to others.
야 지게 상유 줌네 되게 뒤지 제가 된 제다디야 나가러 와서 줌네 되게 최송 마디제 제거를 제거를 마디 디바치교 말에 개와 주고래 람디곰고 디곰고서 마 탑란 된 말마도 신 탑식하여 말아 상유 줌네 되게 상계 찬의 최 된의 탑란 먹고 된 찬의 탑란 된바 된제 안디니기 두제디게 냠len 제겐디게 that 망고 상여고 톱사여서 망고 자준비 저부터 망고 전시선 받아야래 로아 다 디게 상이게 탑란 땜바디 만연바체 안디 냠는 암조고로 만연 된냐야 고가 마라 되네 지게 될야 안 롭션 지에게 고 마라와디게 다 두스진행한 주게 냐와다 눈로와다 두스나다 망고하디는 책으로와 지사 상이 줍는 디게 최 냠렌나 두시 동아 세야데 디기투에게 잘해나다 나가러와 디마도 요마러와
Buddha Shakyamuni taught extensively, and he taught how to cultivate the mental paths that eliminate suffering and its causes and lead to the attainment of a lasting, stable happiness and abiding in a state of bliss that is not interrupted by a moment of suffering. And so many practitioners, both in Buddha Shakyamuni's lifetime, as well as those subsequently, in dependence on the Buddha Dharma, have gathered knowledge and integrated that knowledge within themselves, transformed themselves completely, and attained liberation from suffering and misery. And whilst countless beings have achieved the state of an Arhat or a Buddha, the suffering realms of samsara is still full of beings, many of which don't even have yet an imprint of the Dharma. Others, whilst they may have imprints, they are lost in the suffering lower realms, experiencing intense misery and pain.
지사상의 점내디 송여라 톱놈 디바 취미 조신 조유동아 차기 미셀라 니게 도바 샹라 푸면데 춘예 덴바덴베 조아 교세데 예 톱놈 디비 취미 조신 세데 조유동아 디바디 파 취파 주신 예파 주신의 그 다시 디바 메바세 요 말에라레 톱놈 디바 취미 조신 조유도나 누가 창이 미셀라세데 경화절 누가 유바디 예파 안 락베수 렌제 안 누가 디메바세제 경화절이야 안 누가 세토야 되네 요 말에라레 조유동아 차이세 나는 니기 똑바 샬라 보면데서 예기교 대기교 연된디게 경화절마 제제는 경화절이야 안 대기 용투야 되네 되네 요 말스페네 조도되베네 부즈라 아미기 칼라 칸마 루시네 아니 저 조도야 세야디 연구로와 디나신 네기 연된디게 경화절마 조거나마 파 루제 안 경화절마 귤마 루제는 안 지금삼사 경화절 갈래야 뭐하지 동아세토야 디기 줍도야 가요 말에서 이도 바실라비치 다 가리오레람네 춘이 덴바덴베 조아규로세데 니 춘이 덴바덴베세데 춘이기 데니기 남샤 최 탐제 직대 고 람디치니 디조그서 군주베 남샤 람냠는지기 림바 아니 디곰발레트네 동방이 또베 따와 디곰발레트네 타바다 탐지기 고 톱투고레 셈베기 데니 남샤 최기 야간젤에 만주기 냠는지기 최기 람기 림바 냠는 제타 림바 등이 마 띵기리스 지선 딩이 마 셰샤바디 경주에 라렌데 따제 냠는지 라렌 따바 있나 되는 타바토고리스 코벨 조제 타바탐지 요고 톱투고리스 마도 셰디 냠는 마제바 있나 톱투야요 말에서 상이 좀 내려 코로나에 디순고르와
There's a famous verse from Buddha Shakyamuni. He taught that I cannot eliminate your negativities with water. I cannot wash away your negativities with water. I cannot remove your suffering with my hand. I cannot bestow my realizations, my good qualities on you like a mother giving food to a child. The only way I can help is by teaching you the complete and unmistaken path, and you yourself striving for liberation. And there is tremendous truth here. The Buddha, even a perfected being like a Buddha, cannot do the work for ourselves. What they can do, though, is lay out the complete and unmistaken path before us, and then it's up to each individual sentient being, as they're gathering knowledge, to integrate that within themselves. And to the extent that they strive in this task, liberation, freedom from suffering and misery, comes ever closer.
당아지 뒤 전유 뒤용 보시 냠는 지기에 랍나 소소 당아주래 냠는 지기에 지기어 말해버스 배가서 소소래야 삼다베 나가주기로 다 소소라랑기 지게 기회 잡아다 당아주기 망용다 야체쇼 망고 연구로와 제자다 소소라랑기 기회 잡아 소소게 냠는 지 소소하고 봐제 직장 퇴바지 된다 삼다 냠는 지 소소하고 봐제 소소하고 어디 마시안 마시 아니 지게 샹바시제 안마 도스마 야고지시 안 콘솔리 냠는 제주바 콘솔리아 딜랄렌 따주바이나 아니 소수기 안 두스제제디 안쪽에 두용 오버시 냠는 제다시고로와 지산 데네기 아니야 내가블리아 안직 사생이 집에 토네 로버 강지 두두 제바이나 두용 오버시 토네 냠는 배 자침부 슈체 모드나 충충충 지그거로 받아간다.
In this final sentence, in every way possible, train in these profound methods of benefiting others. The exclamation mark goes along with the word to train. So in other words, what is being emphasized here by the third Dalai Lama is that we need to train our mind. We need to gather knowledge and integrate that within ourselves. And if one's wondering, well, I am a very limited being. How can I engage in these 4 ways of positively influencing others when I am still so limited? My knowledge is limited, my integration of that knowledge is also limited. Well, to the extent that we have love and compassion for others, we need to strive to train our mind, gather ever more knowledge of the Dharma, and apply that consistently, repeatedly over a sustained period, transforming our way of thinking. And as we are developing now, to the extent that we are developed now, with those with whom we have a connection and who are receptive to us, we should guide them. We should practice generosity in whatever way we can, pleasantly talk to them about the Dharma, and encourage them in their practice. So we can only do this to the extent that we have connection with others, and we have knowledge and integration of that knowledge, and we have love and compassion. But where we do it in particular, for example, generosity, even if in this life we are not able to guide them in the cultivation of the Dharma or to encourage them in that direction, we create connection with them, which is of great benefit in lives to come.
Lam Rim Guanma Sheje, the Chasa, the doing over Shina, the Lam Rim Yamling, Chasa, Jidina, the Dugore, Dujupache. Kare Lamna, that the Duen Tumba said Tamadilla, Duen Tumba says, Shia, Robert Chevala, Lapchichabala, Sosu and Yamlin Chegore, Sigurvada. That Sosu and Yamlin Chegore said, that Duen Jobada, Nyambar Mawa said, Nyambar Mawa, Shenlia. Labjigore, Shehore, City, Karashore, and the Jiggy, Gewachima, Hadami, Govanto, Yagdunda, Tablam Dea. And then Kubi Dunga Tale, Dredge, Tarbi Govanto, Yagi, Tablam Dea. Semja Tamjig, the Sanyo Govanto, Tablam Dea, my Nyambar Mawadi, Chasan di Shehorwa, Jeza Dima, that Semjela, Deniki Ma, Labjikabu, Yagur, Denijala. Sosugi Yamlin Chehurwa, Chesan Sosu Yamle Jala, Kibu Chungalam Yirimbadi, Shan Mal of Javala, Sosugi Kibu Chungalam, Tumo Lamiribanya, Sosu Lobchan Chekure. Chesan Denigi Chair, Shimba de Lea, and the Karakure Sene, Sosu in a Kiwi Shinji, Denji Janamado, Kiwi Shin Mateva, Hahu Marwa, Chesan Kiwi Shin Densu and the Lemrugonama, Kiwi Shin Densu Chagua, Chesan Sosu Kiwi Shin Den, and then Ma Kibu Chungada, Jingita, and Chimpiki Lamirimbadi, Lola Chang. Then Ma Shan Ma She, Sosu Dun to Batche, then they answer Nyambar Mawa, Ma Shan Ma She, Ma do Sulupje, then it consolia di Yamlen Chechu, Sachi, the Higoro, Chesa, Mazu Lamrim Yamlen Dinade, Chasan Dinade duty of Chagora.
Hopefully you see from my explanation that actually, as we are nearing the end of our text in the Lam Rim, the entire presentation is actually included here within these 4 ways of positively influencing others. The entire Lam Rim is included here in this small section. In particular, in the 4th one, living in accordance with the teachings oneself. The meaning of this is one has to train one's mind in dependence on knowledge. And one has to make great effort to transform one's mind repeatedly over a sustained period, applying oneself to receiving teachings and integrating those. And one does so with the appropriate motivation. And here that motivation then is expressed in the first two, of giving whatever is necessary and pleasantly teaching the Dharma, where we have the appropriate connection and relationship with others so that they would be receptive. We can talk to them about what the causes of happiness are, the causes of suffering, how to accumulate causes to achieve a good rebirth, how to accumulate causes so as to attain freedom from suffering, and how in fact to become a Buddha. In other words, to guide others in the trainings in accordance with the varying capacity of beings of initial, intermediate, and supreme capacity. But to be able to do that, to be able to engage in the second and the third ways to positively influence others, one needs to engage right now in the fourth, to the extent that we ourselves have gathered knowledge and integrated that into ourselves. We can engage in the second and third ways to influence others. And the starting point to live in accordance with the teachings oneself is to rely on a spiritual teacher. It's through relying on a spiritual teacher that we'll gather knowledge as well as guidance in how to integrate that knowledge within ourselves, and then through applying ourselves to making efforts to integrate that knowledge and to gather ever more, we ourselves will spiritually develop, and we will be able to be a mentor, an example to others, and we will be able to have a positive influence on the lives of others.
안데네 자당하 주게 신이 동아시에단 디기주야리아 신리아 탑람디바 모이니 수의 자퇴제제 안에 신제도치네 강한에 세고와인자 데네 자당하 주게 베네 다데 야오름치게 가르순고라스네 주게 지난 낭배 최되라 낭최 이게 지난 상이 송기 송되래 최기 대선직제 낭배 천직시야다 낭비기 안에 따릅시야 대선 숨체네 제선다 최케 멜랭게 죄네 최케 렌나르 낭배 있나르 낭배 맨날 수이네 낭배 따릅당 낭비기 안에 천직시야디 롭저시나 지고래 송고래 제사 낭배 따릅다 낭배 천직시디 가질래 무인이 수기 취하서 강아 가르치고 왔으네 무인이 수도 하모고의 톤에 마우슬야 안지게 디톤에 강아 몽부티고래 제사 무인이 수도 취 그런 거 라신 무인이 수도 가르치면 제바체 하고 그래서 그래 제사 디 낭배 따릅 톤에 띠네 현실에 띠네 주베 띠네 주고요 바데 낭배 띠네게 남샤시에 낭배 따릅시고래 다 천직도 시디제나 디용구도 디제바체 도시데 디네자 디 낭비 최케레메나 상기에서다 지게 권초숨 잡져서 케멜레베나 디파 로전 제베네 디기 동아 몽부세 두그래서 제가 시한랴 잠바 제바이나 제부 가령고래 시한랴 네버기와이나 제부 가령고래 생아주게다 디최 딕바당 계획이 시고 말에 제가 델리아 시한 잠지 제바이나 잠지 냠는 제바이나 디기 제부 가령고래 사지 시한랴 제 콩조 당아주 뇽모바 되니게 네 제제베네 디기 제부 가려운 거래 세지 이 sendibi jiba jigoro ba jeza di debu kar yung gore jeza da shan la jamze cheba ina an di debu de soso ne seme kiwa shan ne kiwu su du du was jeza ngazu goya de garasin soso kiwu gore shan le kiwu gore jeza digi di sa di was jeza dang an jugi dene yin za dang an zong wi ne so ma xing bi to ne nga zu le no chu mong bu shuo je di to ne gang mong bu li gore dunga mong bu li gore jeza dunga yong ya de wi ne so ma xing bi ki de ngo de ne wi ne so xing go za an ju chi ge wi ne su ne lu di ge nga zu lo le na wa na xin ji da ha da du ge yong du min du che ba che du ji ne wi ne su de ha go ba na dunga de an ga ju ge gyuen shuo go ma de gyuen ma shuo na ane no chu yong go ma no chu wa na gang a chi ge ma de no chu se tu ge je za da du ge nam sha de di ha go chi go re din ya go ba che ba na dunga se ya de di gi tu ya le ping du se de ya ram chi ge di ne chen chi ge je za nang chu dang ane ma din bi gi da du sin ka so re da du ge nam sha sa je ka so re sung go ro wa
His Holiness has spoken a lot, and also he teaches in accordance with his advice in terms of how to have a positive influence on others, whether it's those who are clearly Buddhists, and he presents the Buddha Dharma in the way that we study it here, but also he shows by his example and he gives advice on how to present the Buddha Dharma to those who have no interest in the Buddha Dharma and who don't share certain fundamental views of within the Buddha Dharma. For example, who don't accept karma or reincarnation. So His Holiness encourages his students to have a positive influence on the lives of even those who reject those foundational principles of the Buddha Dharma through explaining them how things exist in reality. Because it's through not understanding reality that ordinary beings, including ourselves, keep creating the causes that lead to further suffering. So here, he's not encouraging us, because he doesn't do this himself in teaching deep Buddhist philosophy, but rather will teach dependent arising. Because through understanding dependent arising, one can understand that both wanted and unwanted results come about in dependence on causes. To the extent that one understands this, an interest will arise in what are the causes that lead to happiness, what are the causes that lead to suffering. And in particular, when one can explain in a skillful manner, in accordance with those around you, that anger only produces pain and misery. Attachment too, whilst it deceives us and we think it's pleasure, leads to pain. Same with pride. And that these ways of thinking are what cause our misery and our pain. And that these, though, have causes. They don't just arise. We do not think in particular, we do not have particular habitual ways of thinking for no reason. They come about in dependence on causes. And as all beings long for happiness, a happiness that's freed from pain and misery, even non-Buddhists are receptive to dependent arising. Because to the extent that they understand what the causes are that lead to suffering and the techniques to abandon them, through cultivating contrary causes, the causes for happiness, they will be interested, and we can have a positive influence on their life.
Dene dasin kurwe tsawa yinbes. Dedan jindang usu kaibi ke lam gomba meba ne zeji bige samdenji kurwe tsawa ju minushin.
That then concludes that section of looking at the 4 ways of positively influencing others. And now then we come to the next outline, combining calm abiding and meditative insight. The translation's a little different, but it's not particularly different here. Moreover, because self-grasping is the root of samsara, a meditative path that is only a single-pointed concentration does not directly contradict that way of grasping. It is unable to sever the root of samsara. So I'll read it again. Moreover, because self-grasping is the root of samsara, a meditative path that is only a single-pointed concentration does not directly contradict that way of grasping. It is unable to sever the root of samsara.
Daksin se de korwe tsawar hes. Chisa dame tope tongi ma toba ina nga zugi samdengi shine toba ina ya shine kache topche komba ina ya dame tome na ane denzin di pangtu mare chisa korwe tsawa chetu mare enza dine za korwa le pangtu mare se korwa le jotu mare tapa tup mare se ore ko benanga je jimbada tsurim 나소바 냠렌제 아니 띵이지 신의 곰 신의 토바이나 동이 도메나 마토바이나 코알레 저투 말해세 단에 지티스 모래 아니야 동이 도체 동이 또 봐이나야 동이 라미비게 신의 마고마이나 야디 아니 그래서 동이 또 봐이나야 동이 라미비 신의 마고마 신의 마톱나 동이 또 봐이나야 동이도 공부하는 가지고 맨날 코와를 저두고 말가서 뉴슈 쳐보 차두고 말 지사 되네 자 동이를 또 비기 동이 비신의 마고마이나 동이 또 봐잠기 코와를 저두어요 말했어 donda disungore dine zana gargogure son khowala jola gargogo sene shine trup tongbanyi to dine tongbanyi la mi be shine trup da de tongbanyi de la mi be shine trup ne shine di ngane tongbanyi la jebe lakdong shirap lakdong ji khore seza shila son de tongbanyi la mi be shila son de trup khore seza tongbanyi la mi be shila son de gomba la tene tarba tukor ma don tongbanyi la mi be shila son de ma to ba na 탈베고 봐 탈바 두고 말에 산여고 봐 두고 말에 세야 donda disungore 되마 근데 제일 마셔 와되네
The meaning here is that identifying the root cause of samsara as being the ignorance of self-grasping, we need to recognize that no matter how powerful a calm abiding one has developed, so a calm abiding of any of the form or formless realm concentrations, no matter how powerful that calm abiding is, it cannot even harm the ignorance of self-grasping, because it is not directly contrary to the ignorance of self-grasping. So reading here again, moreover, because self-grasping is the root of samsara, a meditative path that is only a single-pointed concentration does not directly contradict that way of grasping. It is unable to sever the root of samsara. Again, what this means is that merely or only having cultivated calm abiding, but not the wisdom realizing emptiness, liberation cannot be achieved, because calm abiding is not directly contrary at all to the root cause of our suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping. Similarly, without calm abiding, but having a wisdom realizing emptiness, one also cannot achieve calm abiding. So even if one has a realization of emptiness, but that realization lacks the stability and the power of calm abiding, one cannot attain liberation. Therefore, what is needed is a union of calm abiding, which holds the object single-pointedly, as well as meditative insight, which is an analytical mind, which can investigate whilst not disturbing calm abiding, and in this way realize emptiness. Then liberation is achieved.
And 다진 코베 자와 임베스 지상 코와 게 규자와 다진 세레 지상 다진의 마방바이나 코와를 저두고 말해서 그러 지상 다진의 코베 자와를 그생 셰바는 다진 델라 다진 정하정아 세베가 나정아 진치어레 델라 나이데 간스당 것은 갈라마도 랑문이 두바 나와 나신 다가레 선배 짐발 한기지 요랑 저기다 남사하고 두고미도 지상 딘의 한기지 요레 데 짐바들라 다진 세오레 지상 다진데 다 델라 데네 저기 되자 공조 나야 두슬리고레 지상 되자당 공조 나게 델라 데네 저기는 심체 소체 제바 샤라 네베기 나소바데 디바 몽고산에 레사용고레 지상 델라 데는 누가 저 콜레게 디용고레서 지상 다진 콜베 자와레서 임비에서
The first part of the sentence, because of self-grasping is the root of samsara. Well, we've covered this in previous weeks. The root cause of all our suffering is the ignorance that grasps at the self as being truly existent. And it's this that is what has to be abandoned in order to achieve liberation from suffering. The problem is, though, that the way the self innately or spontaneously or naturally appears to us is as being independent and unchanging, in other words, as truly existent. But because we are so habituated to the self as appearing in this way, we aren't even aware of it. But it is from this innate grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears as being truly existent, that all our other afflictions, attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, and so forth arise, and karma is accumulated, and we remain bound in these suffering realms of samsara.
산다디 다진디기 다진디 매버서에 대략에 뇌게 년보디 가래라네 진당우수 개베 람 세월 진당우수 개베 진당우수 개베 람시도 데니기 그 다진디 가르친 것은 나 세야디 갈라에 뭐 랑원은 주바디 진디거와 다데 진당우수 가와래도 그 랑원은 주바나 진바나신 다신 집에서나 갈라에 되면 랑원을 마주바세요 뭐 따다가 마주바 공배 또보 로디다 콜리아 년보디리에서 지상 강사 세야디 갈라에 뭐 랑원을 마주바디 랑은도 주변 동바 랑은데 마주바 또베게 로디다 년보차래 니 공고래 세 니 마공바 있나 데니기 로디 매바 있나 데네 제지비게 삼된 잠기 코에 자와 제미뉴스데 삼된 잠기스 데니기 진당고수 다매바 마도바지 딩게지 신의 잠기 아니 다신디 방토 말에 제미뉴스 매바 수도 말에서 코에 자와 다 제미뉴스
Reading the sentence again. Moreover, because self-grasping is the root of samsara, a meditative path that is only a single-pointed concentration does not directly contradict that way of grasping. It is unable to sever the root of samsara. The root of samsara, as was mentioned, is the ignorance of self-grasping. To eradicate something, one needs to cultivate what is directly contrary to it. And what is directly contrary to an ignorance is a consciousness of wisdom. And this particular ignorance, that of self-grasping, what is directly contrary to it is the wisdom that realizes that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, that is not truly established. So it's that wisdom that is directly contradictory or contrary to ignorance. Therefore, merely having cultivated single-pointed concentration, no matter how powerful, that attainment of calm abiding, whilst it is certainly a powerful mind, it is not at all contradictory, and certainly not directly contradictory to the ignorance of self-grasping. And therefore, it is unable to sever the root of samsara, the ignorance of self-grasping.
아니네 미발레 미요버 제주도 네비 신의 매발라서다 나 유디 동반년에 제주도 네데 미요와 신의지 토 매바이나 먼저 신의지 셈 신의 마토바이나 매발 신의 매발 디메토비 셰랍 잠지 지잠제자 뇨모도 미니세데 동반년 또바이네야 동반이 디메토비 셰랍 동반이 또비 셰랍 디 안에 가서 공부했네 신의 톱 매바이나 신의 톱 매나 아니 녀모바도 빵투고 말가서네 다지 녀모바디 빵투 말해서 제가서는 슈크라요 말해서 그러더네.
Now the text continues at the top of page 46, and this then is similar or the same as what was mentioned a few moments ago. Similarly, and it's now coming from the converse point of view. Similarly, a wisdom alone that realizes non-true existence, but lacks the calm abiding that dwells unwaveringly and single-pointedly on objects of meditation, is unable to eliminate the afflictions no matter how much it searches. So read it again. A wisdom alone that realizes non-true existence, so wisdom realizing emptiness, but lacks the calm abiding that dwells unwaveringly and single-pointedly on objects of meditation, is unable to eliminate the afflictions no matter how much it searches. The reason that a wisdom that realizes emptiness, no matter how much one cultivates it, and no matter how often one engages in the meditation, the reason it cannot eradicate the root cause of cyclic existence is if it lacks the power of single-pointed concentration. That wisdom alone cannot eradicate the ignorance of self-grasping, despite being directly contrary to it. And that again is because it lacks the power of single-pointed concentration.
지당 신의 줍 신의 톱제 되네 동반이 또 왜네 다 동반이를 미비 신의 톱이 내가요 말어 지당 신의 유 현대식을 미네 근데 상지 육구의 꿀을 미네 신의 줍 신의 톱살 아니 동반이 또 된 가사이네 다 동반이를 미비 신의 토구를 내가봐도요 톱이 내가요 말 이 신의 양자호 동반이를 미네 신의 줍고래 이나다 신의 주변에 녀마나 신의 강화용만 내라용으로와 맞아 제가 동반이를 미비 신의 공부를 신의 주고 공부를 진의 공부할 때네 동반이를 미비 신의디 토고를.
An important point to be clear on, whilst it's certainly in theory not impossible, it is highly unlikely that calm abiding is newly attained on the object of emptiness. And that is because emptiness is such a subtle object. You can say always emptiness is attained on a far coarser object. The texts usually encourage to cultivate a calm abiding, single-pointed concentration on an image of the Buddha. So on a mental image of the Buddha, one develops calm abiding. Thereafter, when actual calm abiding has been achieved on a coarse object such as a mental image of the Buddha, then one meditates on other topics. But with each topic that is now a little subtler, calm abiding needs to be newly attained on that subtler object. And when one eventually then comes to meditate on emptiness and places the realization, holds the realization of emptiness with calm abiding, this is a far subtler object. So one progresses towards realizing emptiness and holding it with calm abiding. So there's a gradient here in terms of the subtlety of the object. But as one progresses along that gradient from coarse to subtler to most subtle, the new attainment of calm abiding on a subtler object is much easier than the initial attainment on the coarser objects. So therefore one progresses relatively rapidly.
동반이 라미베 제시의 네투에게 뉴버의 제디 장매바이나 동반이 공반에 균류군의 도매에 되어서 공명지 셈매파 남의 쉬어라서 바야는 지게 셈매 강화 채용하다 되는 연구 유유라 되는 인자다 동반이 라미베게 동반이 도블로디 동반이 공명도 안디 동반이 도블로디나 촌대이 띵이진데 유 동반이들 제시도 네베 신의 용어디 루코고래 디ngo 줍차바이나 된 동반이라 가자 냠바샤 되베네 강하규님에게 메르 루심 신장게 대화리고로와 동반이를 미베 신의 검디네 신의 주변도 동반이 가자 검네 강하류 르라 강하 셈라 강하 루심 신장게 대베 심베게 띵에스네 기도고 손대기 띵에스 자용 되네서 동반이를 미베 신의 주고 그래서 되네게 동반이를 또베 셔러 손대 띵에스네 신의 용어 동반이 미베 신의 용어 마도 주르메바이나 동반이 공바이나 나는 셈라 강하자 류레 되스 강하 요팅 아직 안 미치고 봐 균리고 냠바샤마도 셈여야 요도야 남영호 샤 차고로 유사로 디네자 동반이라 미베신 디네자데 균리고 검통매나 디네 동반이 디도 볼로데 되서 공바점비 다선의 네투마로와 제가 건 균리고 무티니 니파디야 고고로 제가 신의 마도바나 다진 방토말 네투말에서 김전디로하고 변행아지 직 신지下班的 망보는 때 쉬어 좀 거기下图 제투말과 살지 쉬는 자투말과 제가 뭐 망보라 쉬어 디나시리 데로와 추루신의 메로 되었다 얘네 야만 쇠샤 야 되었다 쇠샤 저번에 추두코투말과 저부터서 야 메메와서 야 저는 메 장모차로와 디나시 조신서와 그 무디지 메르마서 무디지 바다샤베는 주디길길길길 소보죠 고용으로 니나신다 시네마토바는 되었 동반이고 되었컴데 곧 다신의 방토고 말 제가 디네자 동반이를 제치도 니베 시네기 검제 시네토바나 되고 동반이를 미비게 가서 다센들에 뇌에게 누바를 마서 채용 거래지로 신의 아디시메다
What has been presented thus far in these first two sentences is that only cultivating calm abiding or only cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, neither of these alone can lead to liberation. These need to be combined. So mentioned now how that when one is developing calm abiding, one first will develop it on a coarser object and then progress to subtler objects, and eventually when one has also a realization of emptiness, one will be able to hold that realization of emptiness single-pointedly. So here, when one has reached that point, one has a realization of emptiness and a well-developed mind of calm abiding, where one can hold a subtle object such as emptiness in an undistracted manner for as long as one wishes. And the mark or the sign of having achieved calm abiding, that the physical and mental bliss of pliancy is not lost. So here, the yogin has realized emptiness and is holding it as long as they wish with calm abiding. And this serves then, because calm abiding is so stable, they're not at all, even slightly, distracted from the realization, which means they gain deep familiarity with emptiness. However, the moment they start to investigate again, the moment the yogin starts to investigate again, their calm abiding is lost, their physical and mental bliss is lost, and then there's some physical and mental discomfort that now arises like before. And this is because the single-pointed concentration has been lost, because now the mind is wavering, because the yogin has started to analyze, because to cut this thick root of samsara, one needs to hack away at it again and again. In other words, one needs to use ever more analysis to get down to subtler realizations of emptiness. The problem they have, though, is as soon as they analyze a bit more, their calm abiding, their concentration is lost. But if they don't analyze further, the depth of their realization of emptiness doesn't progress. So just like if one is trying to cut a very thick root, when one swipe will not cut the root, one needs to hack away again and again. Or if one's watering a plant, just once adding a bit of water is insufficient. Repeatedly water needs to be added. Similarly, one needs a stability of calm abiding so as to gain deep habituation with, or profound, to gain habituation with the realization of emptiness. But for that realization to deepen, further analysis is also required.
소소 rangi da kiwi chawa kharijena sosugi nyamlenche ani shale pa shi shale pa chima shi lobdenche shale ya nyamlenche juya an jigi nelya an denegi tone an shale ya an jigi da denegi nyamlenche ya an tungi madangwa da dene kanga yugan zulya an sasinge tone roboche ya da denegi tone ondu she ding an jigi 다 두용 오버시 냠는 제대 다 전시 선바나 신등아 주용 통말데 이내다 소수의 군로토네 다 심제 디게 심제는 이제 대화대 대나 선비게 삼로치나 심제는 이제 동화단 자와 선비게 잠니지 삼다 지자대에서 심제 탐지게 된다야 산유고와 토벌쇼 선비게 소수나 되네게 삼다 디 된다야 전시 선비게 주비 냠는 두용 오버시 냠는 나와 나신 예 되네 토네 강토도 지인 선비게 삼나 다제 되는 거 저게 다 소수게다 베네 아주 중사 셈 샹리아 준시에데 소수라는 게 준시메 선비 삼다네 소수게 준마셰바제 가르셰베나 장모자샤지 냠는 집에 토네 아니 샹리아 안 준시게 말 준시네 안 되네 야고요 말세 샹리아지 직시에네 아니 냠는 제주야다 나 소수라는 게 내다 지게 가야지야 그때 샬리아 펜버 주야다 데니시 제는 샬레네 오투치네 약보여서 람되지야다 도시에딩 저게 두용고 신나네 가지고다 퇴섬 제비게다 소소가 라렌다야로지 아저 되네게 토네 다 충충원에 됐어서 지기 지나가서야 체셔 줘야 가서 라렌다고 하디 도시인다디데 디레 되네가 지금은 제 디르다 디시 직디나들 안지게 되네게 된 조원냐면 제 조어데 라버 자고래 세지 장고고래 송송고로와 언도나시디레 당아서 뒤용고 것이 더 내섬 다야 되네. 난 덴마 상인의 무티슈 제마 무티슈래.
Our time is already up for tonight, so we'll leave the text there and restart from the same place next week, because there's more to say in this presentation. Then just to review what we've looked at tonight, we've now concluded the presentation on the 4 ways to positively influence others. So I want to encourage you to take this to heart. It's not a practice solely for bodhisattvas. It is how bodhisattvas live their life, and it's for us to emulate them. So we need to train. The key point here is the word, right at the very last word in Tibetan, which is train and an exclamation point. That is the key word in that presentation. It's about, to the extent that one has understood the Dharma, to take that meaning to heart. Whatever love and compassion one has within oneself, to develop this further through receiving more teachings and reflecting on them again and again, and enacting the transformation that comes about on the meditation cushion, enacting it in our interactions with others. Not just with love and compassion, but all the teachings that one receives. Take those to heart. Develop them within oneself. Because to the extent that one transforms one's mind and feels the positive impact of the Dharma in one's own life, one will want that for others. And right now, our capacity is limited. But as we understand the Dharma, and understand in the way that I presented it tonight, it is about cultivating causes for happiness, and avoiding causes that will otherwise lead to suffering, and eradicating previously accumulated causes that will lead to suffering. That is it. We need to strive in those 2 endeavors. And to the extent that we do, and we experience that benefit, we'll want others to as well. And to the extent that we have developed ourselves, trained ourselves, we will be able to have a positive impact on others. So, for example, we all know the 10 non-virtues, and one of them is not to lie. So generally, we do not distort the truth with others, but integrate that commitment with the other teachings. Integrate it with the thought that I will not distort the truth in my interactions with others, because I will not break the trust that I have with them, the bond that I have with them, because that will limit how much I can help others, the benefit I can be in their lives, the influence I can have on them. Similarly with generosity, practice generosity, but not just with the motivation, through this generosity may I become a Buddha to help others, but express that in a slightly different way. May I become a Buddha to benefit others. May I create this, through the connection I'm creating with this being, may I have a positive influence on them, guiding them in how to accumulate the causes for happiness and eradicate those which would otherwise lead to suffering. And if that doesn't ripen, that influence on them doesn't ripen in this life, it will ripen in future lives. And that is sufficient. So in this way, I encourage you to train yourselves, to apply yourselves repeatedly over a sustained period, integrate the teachings within yourself, transform yourself, and that way have a transformative impact on all those around you. Thank you very much.